Welcome back. Well, this morning South Africans actually woke up to a shocker, and that is a record high petrol price. And we asked the question this morning, which will be the question that we are carrying through all out, and that is, how is this petrol price affecting you? But of course, in April, we saw that petrol price going up, and at that stage, you know, panic buttons were ringing because it was a record. And now this morning, 82 cents at least more is what you will be paying for unleaded petrol. But we're going to unpack this for you because I think it's important that we all understand exactly how this affects us. And of course, also to help us unpack it, we've brought in an economist, we've brought in an energy expert, and of course, other people as well to help us dissect that. And let me just introduce our guest. John Luz is here with me in studio. Good morning.
Morning, Zakina.
And our energy expert joining us in Port Elizabeth at this stage is SABC. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning.
And we will be joined by Leighton Beard of the AA as well, SABC Ngemane, energy expert from the Kucha Development Corporation. And perhaps let me start with you, SABC, by just breaking down the petrol price for starters. We know the price this morning is 15 Rand 79 cents per litre. But what exactly goes into the makeup of that 15.79?
Yes, I think their main factors are four indeed. It is the cost drivers, as we're aware of the crude, as well as the margins linked to the retail and wholesaling, as well as, of course, the fuel levies, as well as the component related to the accident fund. Those would be the four aspects that really inform the South African fuel costs.
So in terms of the levy, you have the fuel levy. And how much of the 15 Rand 79 goes to the fuel levy?
Well, if you look at the overall cost, the real big drivers would be the crude component as well as the margins linked to it. I think some of the stats show that if we look at the taxes and the insurances, really in comparison to some of the other G20 countries, South Africa comes relatively lower. I think that is probably the view we should be taking to understand the bigger picture. If we look at South Africa, really about, give or take, 15% of our product is imported, and the balance of that is basically manufactured through local refining capacity. That's quite significant because it indicates that we do, to a large extent, remain quite sensitive to such changes in the crude cost. What perhaps is important is to start to talk around the direction of energy planning and how it will influence the refining capacity in South Africa going forward.
So speaking of that, just with regard to our capacity as a country to actually produce our own fuel, you know, speak to us about that. Are we able to be self-sustainable in this regard if we tried? As
indicated, in South Africa, we do have refining capacity that exists across the country in KZN, in the Western Cape. In Mpumalanga, we have established refineries that are operating. Perhaps what we should be looking at is how we keep these operational going forward, and perhaps opportunities to upgrade these to cleaner fuels. That's significant. And of course, coupled with that and complementing that would be new refining capacity in South Africa. When we look at that, of course, is to how that would drive the energy security of supply as well as affordability. And I could not miss the fact that part of the National Development Plan objectives talk to that, and of course to drive inclusive growth in the country. I think if we start to talk to that, of course, the role of indigenous resources, oil and gas in South Africa become quite significant. And we wouldn't isolate ourselves just to the country, but would look at also the African regional integration.
But of what benefit is that to the ordinary consumer? Because if you talk about fuel being produced in South Africa, one doesn't see that difference at the pump.
Well, I think at the end of the day, part of what the drive is around energy security is to ensure diversity. Diversity is important. affordability, and that it actually does catalyze economic growth. So if we start to talk about integrated value chains in the continent, we are exploring that exactly. Look, in the African continent already, you have Nigeria, Angola, which are already part of the OPEC producers of fuel and products related to the sector. Another important emerging example would be what we're seeing in Uganda, where they are advancing the production of the resources on their Albertine Graben Basin. And as part of their drive is to establish a refinery capacity in Uganda. That's significant because you can see it's driven around ensuring self-reliance and driving the national content objectives, which tie into the inclusive growth objectives that South Africa is also looking at.
Well, that speaks to our capacity as a nation to actually produce fuel for ourselves. But we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll look at the economic impact of this particular fuel price increase. And also, we will break it down for you in terms of exactly how much of that 15 Rand 79 goes to what aspect included in that fuel price. So stay tuned for that.